Who can be on church council? We begin with the people who are confirmed members and members in association who are elected by the congregation. We've found time and time again, people realize, oh, I have never actually formally joined the Uniting Church. So can I be on church council? And part of the difficulty we face here is that many of our congregations haven't really thought much about having new members for quite some time. We need to pay attention to that. And recently we had a case, one of our congregations, they're now running a confirmation class and making it possible for people to become members of the church so they can be on church council, including the person who's already chairing the church council. So, yep, that's a good place to begin. And of course, it's not just older people with lots of experience. The church council can have people who are younger and older, people from different backgrounds, different experiences, different skills. Okay, so that's the first section. We talk about elders or leaders elected by the congregation. In the regulations, it says that half the church council should be elders or leaders. And that's something that the Uniting Church holds special in the way it operates. Elders comes from the Presbyterian background and leaders from the Methodist background. But to ensure that the church council doesn't become just a management group without any sense of spiritual oversight, we say we need to have people who have an eye for the spiritual health of the congregation. So that becomes tricky when you've got 25 elders in your congregation. Does that mean they all have to be on church council? That's a tricky one, because we know, looking at the way that organizations work and governance bodies work, about the right size for a governance body, for people to actually take their responsibility seriously and contribute well and effectively. About 12 people is a good size for a church council. It doesn't say that in the regulations, but we know from experience that that's actually what works. So we have time and time again, the Presbytery giving support to congregations to reframe, rethink how they organise their church council. Now, initially, when the church was formed in 1977, we had an elders council and a church council, or a parish council. And time again, they would try and make the same decisions as each other, or opposite decisions as each other, and get into strife. So in 1999, the United Church said we need to have one church council that holds all that together. The spiritual, pastoral, learning, education, alongside property and finance and risk management all go together so that we hold that as one. You can have an executive, of course. Now, we also expect that any ministry agents who are in placement in the congregation would be on church council. All right, so that's actually part of their role, is to actually attend the church council and provide support and leadership there. Retired ministers can be on church council, any minister in association. They don't have to be elected by the church council, by the congregation, especially, but by agreement of the minister and the church council. So if you have someone who's able to provide support and encouragement, you have that option as well. And you can have one or two co-opted members who you bring on because they've got particular skills or because you want to encourage them. So that's the people who are on the church council. Now, here's some of the frequently asked questions that the Presbytery is always being asked. First of all, how do you elect a church council? Well, in the regulations, it talks about a written ballot. It talks about having nominations that people can read well before a general meeting. So the principles here are: one, discernment. It's not just, okay, who wants to be in church council, put your hand up. It's about people carefully discerning, prayerfully discerning, do I have a call to share and be on church council? And also people carefully discerning, are these the right people? Is this the right mix? And also to avoid a shouting match. You have the chair squad with the loudest voices get to you on church council. We have a written system. How do you do that during COVID-19 when you can't get to a meeting and hand out pieces of paper? Well, Jay Robinson is our resident expert on this process, being a member of the placements committee who've looked at this. And the principle is that you come and everybody has a way of reading the same information. And secondly, everybody has a chance to put their opinion in, whether that be by email, by phoning up, or by sending a written document, or to take part in a meeting using the polls option. But the critical thing is it's an anonymous way of operating. We've talked about elders and church council size, and yes, you can have an executive where you have maybe the chair, secretary, minister, and treasurer to ensure that the church council doesn't get caught up in having to do all the management. So there's no need for the church council to be approving invoices unless they're outside the budget. Okay, so let's have a look at setting the agenda. Remember, this is about shaping the way our church councils meet, and it changes what we're able to do. So first of all, work with a design team. In the Presbytery, we have a design team that works on our meetings, looks at the standing committee meetings, the Presbytery meetings. And at the moment, that's Tom Sperling, who's the chair, Ian Firth as the secretary, and myself. And we sometimes have Cameron as the deputy chair, to have a look at what's of critical importance that we spend time looking at, and what decisions need to be made, and what process will we make sure is there. And that includes thinking about what we need to learn, what we need to discover, how we need to grow as a church council. So that's a critical thing, and being able to think well ahead, and we'll look at how we do that. So here's a thought. Part of our agenda needs to be theological reflection, which includes storytelling, maybe bringing the stories from what we're seeing in our local congregation or in our local community or broader, being able to reflect on what we bring, what wisdom we can find in the biblical material that we have available to us. Prayerful discernment, rather than just at the beginning having a prayer saying, bless our meeting, what would it mean if we actually spent more time praying, less time talking, and more time listening? And coming back to our sense of the missional direction of the church, spending time visioning the future so that there's a sense of where is God leading us. Here's a thought: create an annual agenda. So you don't have to actually go through every committee's report every time, every week, every time you meet. Work out having more significant time to look at particular issues that need to be addressed. Now, if you're the treasurer, you'll probably want to say at least once a year, you're going to have a look at the budget and how it's been set. And maybe halfway through the year, get a sense of what we're noticing, what are the trends, and how do we see what's going on. If you are looking at worship, are there particular times during the year when we have to look at where we're going with that? Do you have a time when you're looking at the missional direction of the church through the year? So there's all kinds of ways you can grapple with an annual agenda. And that might mean setting aside an hour and a half or even a whole day retreat to look at something you're doing as special. Prepare a consent agenda. You don't have to spend an hour wading through all these things here. You don't have to actually have spend time on the apologies, receiving the minutes, receiving the standard reports and approvals of anything that has to be done, and any registers. You can have those written down, and if you have them in plenty of time, you know whether they need to be discussed or not. So the way a consent agenda works is at the beginning of your meeting, you say, okay, is there anything in the consent agenda part that we've written down that needs to be discussed or considered more. Otherwise, we're going to have in one motion approving all 5 of these. All right, so you can save yourself an hour of meeting just by doing that. I can promise you, people will come away with a greater sense of fulfillment and satisfaction at doing something significant if they're not actually just going through the motions of receiving reports and approving minutes. It means you have to be well prepared, and we'll come back to how we write reports in a minute. Here we are, we're there now. Develop report templates. And this is something we're doing for the Presbytery as well as the Presbytery Standing Committee, ensuring that the way our ministers or Presbytery ministers, our committees report to the Church Council or the Standing Committee in our case, so that at the very top of a report, we begin with what needs attention. It's not buried down below. Right at the start, is there something we need to know about? Is there something we need to think about? And this might be part of the annual agenda, for example, where we need to look at what we're going to do around calling a new minister, for example, or in the Presbytery's case, what we're going to do around the Money and Permission program. Another example of a good report would be to provide progress on delegated responsibilities. So this is not actually inviting the Church Council to go over it again. Definitely not. If you've delegated responsibility, you do not need to become that committee again to discuss everything that's been put in the report. If you've delegated it and it's been well reported, say, that's great, well done, moving on to next business. If you have a ministry agent or a minister or a youth worker or someone who's providing pastoral care on behalf of the congregation, they could report on key performance areas in their position description. And once again, you don't have to go over it. You just need to know that it's happening. Risk and compliance. It is important that every church council, every board of the Uniting Church has a section where you are aware of these things. That's part of the responsibility of church council. So if there are any activities that you know may carry a risk, you need to register those. If there's any activities that have actually led to needing to be noted in your risk register, someone falling off a ladder, you need to register that so that you named what happened and you had a way of dealing with ensuring that will never ever happen again, which comes down to the compliance issue. If you're running youth or children's activities, you need to know as a church council and to register it in your minutes that these things were approved beforehand and you had a risk management plan. So if you are taking people in cars anywhere, I used to be a youth worker and I needed to put that down and it became very important one day when one of the young adults decided to speed off and rolled the vehicle with 5 young people in the car. We needed to, it was good that we had a risk register and we were able to say we knew what was happening and we're able to deal with this now. So the same thing applies to children's activities, bouncy castle, providing of food and drink and so on. Those are all risk and compliance issues. It's helpful to register. You don't have to spend a lot of time at church council, but you need to have it registered in your report. And lastly, any personal or pastoral matters. You don't have to have an hour-long talk on all the pastoral issues across the church. You can have a pastoral team that does that. But you need to be aware of any critical issues that may be impacting the health of the congregation. And that includes being responsible for ensuring that the minister is taking annual leave, or the youth worker or the pastoral worker. They're taking annual leave, they're having supervision, and they are developing a continuing education plan. So we encourage our ministry agents to report to their church councils on those things, and they keep the presbytery informed on their continuing education and supervision as well. But the church council should be paying attention to that. Okay, and incorporate prayers through the meeting so that we don't have a prayer at the beginning only, but if there is a time during the meeting when we're dealing with complex matters and we need to stop and breathe and listen, it's helpful to have someone on the church council who can put their hand up and say, would it be helpful for us to stop and pray now? Particularly if it's around pastoral matters, or if you've come to a point where you're really having to work out what direction you're going, that's when we need to be praying. And finally, reflecting on the meeting. It's good to have someone who's not chairing the meeting or taking the minutes to reflect at the end of the meeting. How did that go today? What did we notice about the way we talk to one another? What did we see as critical things in our meeting today that we need to remind ourselves of as we go? What are the things we learned as a church council? And you could put a roster around that so we all take responsibility for observing the way we operate as a church council. And we'll see if we can do that today. Any questions? Any comments? And we've got about 6